actively marketing it.
We all know the conflict between US and Iran that escalated at the beginning of 2020 when Soleimani has been killed by US military forces. How has the stock market performed during that episode? And how do you see the relationship between the US and Iran on the long term, and how it might affect, let's say, Iranian equities?
So after Soleimani, we were just watching the market very closely. Exactly after Soleimani, it went down by 10%, and then it rallied to the all-time high levels. So it was, the market was cheap. At the end of the day, the biggest driver of your, future returns will be the valuation that you're paying for the assets that you're buying. So, so those events never really had a long-lasting impact on the market. What is more interesting is those relations between the US and Iran. Those relations started changing last year. The main event was the US presidential election when Biden won the election. And Biden has been very consistent and vocal throughout his campaign that he wants to go back to the nuclear deal with Iran, resume the deal. He didn't do anything during the first 3 months of his presidency, of his term, because he was busy with things on the Capitol, with coronavirus, with everything domestically. Then you had presidential elections in Iran. So from April, there was no one to talk to because there was just in Iran because the previous president couldn't do anything, and the new president was elected in June. Then the new president had to be confirmed, sworn in by the parliament, which happened in August. His cabinet had to be approved. You had September. Then, the Iranian side had to basically come up with a strategy, with a plan on how to speak with the US. And they started speaking in October. So something that could have happened as early as January, just after Biden won the election. There was a window before the Iranian election that they could just make a deal quickly. It didn't happen because everyone was too busy with something else. So they had to wait until October. And the negotiations started in October. Negotiations are held in Vienna, in Austria, between all the UN Security Council members, which is the EU, UK, China, Russia, and the US and Iran, about the resumption of the nuclear deal. And things accelerated this year. So we were expecting that maybe in the second quarter, they're going to make a deal. Best case scenario, maybe mid-March, just before the Persian New Year. And now over the last week, I've been hearing that actually the US has been making such good proposals to the Iranian side that the Iranians actually couldn't believe, how good terms they were being offered. And that there is I'm reading a lot of opinions of many different analysts that are close to those negotiating teams, that the deal could actually happen as early as February, so still this month, which would be very exciting, very, very quick. So this is happening, and when you look at the currency in Iran, the Iranian rial started strengthening this year, which the first time since the new president was elected, the currency just kept depreciating, and now it's appreciating for the first time. Also, what is consistent with this is that the US a couple of days ago actually removed some of the sanctions on Iran, not the most important ones, but just to show, I guess, some goodwill, but also to make it possible for both parties to go back to the nuclear deal. They removed some sanctions. The deals that they are likely to negotiate will mean that US lifts a lot of primary, maybe also a lot of secondary, and maybe also some primary sanctions, and which will mean that it's back to business for a lot of industries in Iran, and Iran is selling oil again on the global markets. In exchange, Iran, stops enriching uranium, and whatever they enrich too much, they will just ship it to Russia, that will hold it. And they will take it from Iran, of the nuclear material. Why is this important for Iran? Well, for Iran, going back to the oil markets means probably around $50 billion per year of additional revenue, plus a very quick $10 billion, because they have a lot of oil stored and floating storage and some onshore storage that they will quickly release as soon as the sanctions are lifted. And $50 billion per year, to have some context for this, to show how important this is for Iran, is look, the whole budget deficit in Iran is $17 billion. Trade deficit is around $2 billion per year. So the trade is actually balanced. This is ex-energy. This is amazing in Iran, because even if you don't take energy exports into account, the trade is pretty much balanced. Last 9 months, they exported $35 billion worth of goods, and they imported $37 billion worth of goods. So it's pretty balanced. So when you have, additional injection of $50 billion per year, it solves all the problems. It solves the problem of the budget deficit. It solves the problem of how to pay for essential imports. It solves the problem of accessibility to hard currency for all the importers and whoever wants to buy, the dollar or the euro, which will stabilize the currency. Once currency is stable, inflation goes down. Inflation before Trump was 10%. The inflation was spiking. When you look at the last 20 years of inflation, it was always spiking because of sanctions. When inflation goes down to 10%, around 10, 15, whatever, but not 40, 50, right? Suddenly the macro environment becomes more stable. So the local businesses are suddenly able to think more long term, to do some planning, and to start investing. So this will help to create investment boom. This will also help, stable inflation will help the Iranian households, which actually were getting hit the most by inflation of the essential goods. Interest rates will go down, so there will be easier access to credit. Economy will benefit a lot. Iranian exporters will benefit a lot because the volumes will be higher, the transaction costs will be lower. The stock market will benefit because, with lower interest rates, there will be, on a relative basis, companies paying 20% dividend yield. I mean, it's already very attractive, but it will become a no-brainer, right? So this is very important for Iran to sign this deal. They understand this. And I think it's going to happen, and potentially sooner than we expected.
Right. Speaking about inflation, how do Iranian equities usually perform in periods of higher than average inflation? This is a concern right now across all regions with inflation.
So equities in Iran perform quite well during the inflation. Some industries better, some industries worse. What we found useful is to look for companies that have strong pricing power. So companies that can increase prices without killing the demand, for example, or that don't have to compete with other companies. Inflation is actually, it helps Iranian companies to increase profits, because they manage to keep their costs in check very often. For example, wages are often, they go up, but it's always too late and not enough, right? So the spread between the product prices that companies are selling and the wages that they are paying, it's actually expanding, increasing. So their profit margins are expanding. So inflation is not bad for many of those companies that can take advantage of this. For example, we like manufacturers that sell some specialty machinery, for example, to big producers, big steel producers big petrochemical producers, because those big producers have to buy those elements, those parts, and they don't really care whether this part will be 20% more expensive or less expensive, because in the overall production process of whatever steel or petrochemical good that they're making, this is not a significant part of the cost, right? So they are not very sensitive to those changes in pricing. So for the producers of those specialty parts, it's also relatively easy to increase the prices.
Is there any risk for Iran to fall victim to the so-called Dutch disease?
Yeah, look, in Iran, you have many different asset classes, right? So people always can choose whether they invest in fixed income, whether they invest in equities, whether they invest in real estate, in gold coins. Even used cars are an asset class in Iran, because they tend to keep their dollar value. So people use even used cars as a hedge against the currency depreciation. So some markets get overheated from time to time, but I think that the least attractive is probably real estate, because real estate, people understand real estate usually better than other asset classes. Right. That's why the barrier to entry is very low, right? So everyone who has any cash in Iran just buys real estate, right? So we have plenty of investors in the asset class that is easy to understand, which makes it overpriced very often. But there is plenty of asset classes to choose from, so people can move around.
Yeah, in Romania as well, we have 96% home ownership rate, and most of the people only invest in real estate. I think less than 1% invest in the stock market. I mean, it's incredible. If we think that in US, most of the people invest in the stock market, not in real estate.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, you said that dividend yield is high for Iranian equities on average. Are there also withholding tax applicable?
No withholding taxes. No. So no capital gains taxes, no dividend taxes. For now, we don't really pay any taxes as foreign investors. We don't have capital controls, so we are allowed to move money in, move money out. We actually even have special government guarantee that would make it easier for us to move money out and buy hard currency locally, even if we couldn't find access to it on the market. So for the moment, also the fund is tax exempt. So the fund is not paying any taxes, neither in Iran nor in the Netherlands. So it's very efficient.
Right. Do you charge any subscription or redemption fees?
No subscription fees, no redemption fees. So it's easy to buy and sell. We also offer liquidity to redeem units every quarter. What we ask for is 90 days notice, because it just sometimes takes time to exchange the currency, to make the bank transfer and so on. So just to be sure that we can meet the deadline, we ask for a maximum of 90 days notice, but then every quarter investors can redeem their units.
Matthew, I know that you are from Poland, and the last time I checked the iShares MSCI Poland ETF on Morningstar, it had a really interesting valuation metrics. It had a price to cash flow of 3, so looked pretty cheap. Poland also has low debt right now, but not great demographics. Which is your view on Polish equities?
I am not involved in Polish equities. I used to be a long time ago, but I'm not involved. So my level of knowledge is probably not better than yours. I heard that it's pretty cheap. I heard that some Ukrainian stocks listed in Warsaw are very cheap right now. More like a special situation, type of opportunity. I would definitely, if I were, it's not a recommendation, right? But if I were to look for some opportunities, I would definitely be looking at some, food producers based in Ukraine, but listed in Warsaw. In terms of Polish stocks, I don't have a good, insight right now, so I cannot recommend. I heard that it's pretty cheap, so I can confirm that this is what I heard as well.
Right. Can you disclose your current asset allocation in this, let's say, risky market environment?
So my personal?
Your personal one, right.
Oh, that's easy. I'm all in Iran.
Really?
Oh, yes. Through the business and through the market.
Yes, but I was asking for the personal fact, not the business one. So
Yeah.
all your net worth is
I'm long my business, and I'm long the Iranian market. I'm not investing in any other market. So it's apart from some real estate exposure, I'm in the risky assets. I'm long Iran.
Looks pretty impressive to go all in on Iran. You really have a strong conviction there, right? So you believe that
I do.
all these risks,
it's not a
because we have only discussed about risks, but we haven't discussed about, let's say, potential returns. How much do you expect to gain, let's say, on the long term from investing in Iran once foreign capital will start flowing to this market? And when do you consider that it is the right time to sell? Or maybe never, like Warren Buffett says.
No, okay, fine. So first of all, what you said about risks, I experienced all those risks. When we started in 2017, the idea was to get exposure to, companies that will benefit from the opening up of Iran. Instead, we got a change in the U.S. administration and sanctions. Right, we quickly had to adjust our investment strategy, adjust our portfolio, and learn how to invest in this environment. So we experienced all those risks, from the sanctions risk to operational risk to the volatility related risks. Yes, so I think I can say that I understand quite well, the risk for foreign investors in Iran. Now, why we were so stubborn to just stay in Iran and go through the storm of all those sanctions together with the Iranians? Well, because we had strong conviction, and the strong conviction was coming from mainly from the fact that if you pay very low prices for assets, or very low valuations, your downside is limited. Your downside is limited. You may have to wait for the upside, right, to materialize. But you can afford to wait because you're just holding the cheapest assets in the world, right? And they are actually, it's like a long-term option that actually pays you a coupon, right, with high dividends, right? So we can afford to wait. And what's the big prize, on the horizon? I think that valuations could go up. In some realistic scenario, valuations could go up 3 times from the current levels, right? There is no reason why, especially when the macro stabilizes, that the valuations are not more in line with frontier markets, and not at 3-4 times earnings where the companies that we are investing in are, right? Now, earnings can go up 3 times as well. Will surely double over the next, we'll see, right? It's whether this will be a year or 2 or 3, but within the next couple of years, you should see a strong earnings growth in like strong double digits every year, and that's in like hard currency terms. And you could see the expansion of the valuation multiples. So only this can give you upside of 5 times or whatever. But now look at what was happening in markets that were opening up to foreign investors, as Iran will be doing. Look at China in the 90s, Russia in the 90s, Poland in the 90s, right? Poland was some market, that no one heard about, trading at 3 times earnings, right? At some point, foreign investors saw, okay, it's actually a normal country, right? So maybe we start investing. And the market went up, sorry, not to confuse this, went up 15 or 20 times, something like this, in I think, less than 2 years, right? Russia, same, like went up 12 times, I think. China, similar thing, right? And it was, and that was happening because suddenly those markets opened up and a lot of foreign liquidity went into the market and it just pushed, the local prices. Obviously, then they crashed, then they went up again, and so on and so on. But Iran is before all of this started even happening. So I think that at some point we will see a massive bubble there. Bubble driven by foreign investors, big emerging market funds, big ETFs that will have to allocate. Because if Iran goes to frontier market, MSCI Frontier Markets Index, it will be the biggest index member with 30% or something, bigger than Vietnam. It could go actually, it's big enough probably to go straight into, MSCI emerging markets, maybe with some small allocation. So there will be a lot of passive flows. There will be a lot of active flow before the passive flow happens, right? So there will be potentially much more flow that Iran can handle in the short period of time, which will materialize in a big bubble. And at that time, I will not be thinking like Warren Buffett. I will be selling, right? Because if it just goes into bubble mode, I hope I'll be able to ride the bubble, for as long as possible. But then I will sell, and then I'll buy back if it goes back to normal levels. I'm in Iran because I believe in the growth story, but equally true is that I am there because I'm able to buy at the lowest valuations in the world. So this is a very important factor for me. So when I lose this, when those valuations become, the most overheated in the world, which I think is possible, then I'm out.
I think George Soros enjoys riding the bubbles. However, Iran is a very deep value play. So it could pay well if you stay invested for the long term. But what happens if these idiosyncratic risks appear, such as, let's say, repatriation risk, or maybe, I don't know, your mutual fund closes due to low asset under management? I mean, speaking about JP Morgan, I've noticed that they've closed long, short, and managed futures ETFs last year, which were great diversifier for retail investors. So can we be sure that if we handle currency risk, if we handle volatility and stay invested, we will manage to get those returns, or these risks might also appear?
Well, me being involved in Iran, I'm pretty sure about that. Look, we are the only foreign investor that launched after the nuclear deal in 2016 and stayed through the sanctions period, the US sanctions period. There were a couple of other funds, but they basically gave up and they moved out. So we decided to stay with fairly low assets under management because we had strong conviction and because it wasn't a trade for us. It was a really, at least a decade-long opportunity. So we are very, looking very long-term at this, and we are expanding, and we are expanding not only our foreign operations, but we also want to expand our local operations as well, hiring people, building teams, hiring bigger office. So we are really only getting more and more involved in Iran. Now, repatriation risk. Well, these are always the risks in emerging markets that you have to take into consideration. We are doing what we can to mitigate those risks. So, for example, we got the guarantee that I mentioned from the government is what all the biggest European companies, when they were going to Iran, they were getting the same type of guarantee that we have, which is the government guarantee that they will not expropriate our assets and that we don't have capital controls, and that if we even cannot get, buy euros somewhere on the market, we can go directly to the central bank and buy it from them. When they offered me this guarantee, I said, yes, of course, I'll have it, please. But what if the next government changes its mind, right? And they don't like this guarantee anymore. They make a good point that this was introduced in the 50s or in the 60s, so before the revolution. And they kept it throughout the regime change so that foreign investors, knew that they could rely on it. I think that there are risks. There are risks that transfers, for example, money repatriation will take longer than you would like. But potentially you have to, instead of a couple of weeks, you have to wait a couple of months. But I don't think that there are significant risks that you may just lose your capital or not be able to get it out. We've never come even close to those type of risks, even during really volatile periods, under the previous U.S. administration.
By the way, how many investors do you currently have, and do you plan lowering fees in the future?
We have around 60 or 70 investors, and we don't have any plans to change the fees for now. We will see in the future.
And they are, let's say, high net worth individuals, or also?
All of them are high net worth individuals or family offices. So it's too early for institutional investors to invest in Iran because, at institutional investors, they are very much compliance driven. So from the compliance perspective, it's a complicated case because you have to understand sanctions. You have to understand what you can do, what you cannot do. So usually, they will say no, basically, right? So all of our investors, even if these are bigger family offices, the decisions are made by the main risk taker, right? So there's a person who just decides, I want in or not, and that's it. Not, the processes that go through from many different departments.
Is your fund regulated or audited by any third party?
Yes, obviously we have a auditor in the Netherlands. We are also under the light regulatory regime. So there is the AFM, is the Dutch regulator that offers different regulatory regimes. We opted for the light regulatory regime because with this structure we can invest in Iran, basically. But yes, we have an oversight of the regulator of the Central Bank of the Netherlands. Also, our administrator is monitoring us as the investment manager if we do our work in line with the prospectus. And every counterparty that we deal with, for example, our banks, everyone is interested in monitoring us because they don't want us to, for example, to violate any sanctions, because this would be also risk for the service providers that we work with potentially. So we get a lot of supervision.
What do you think about retail investors? Should they buy emerging markets and go to the beach, as Raul Paul suggests, or they should also stay diversified across developed markets?
Well, if you want to go to the beach, I think you should diversify, right? Because you won't be laser focused on your investment, right? You'll be focused on the waves or whatever you want to do, you like to do at the beach, right? So yeah, absolutely, I would say they should diversify. I mean, again, we had this discussion, right? It may make sense not to diversify, but then you really need to know what you're doing, understand exactly the type of the risk that you're taking and why you want to take this risk. And it's absolutely something that I would consider. But then you cannot go to the beach and forget about this, right?
Do you think it would be totally crazy for someone to invest all his money right now in your Iranian fund? Or it could be something risky, but which will most likely bring a very good return for the next 10, 20 years. And if we dismiss let's say volatility, then, and you don't trade, right? you should simply wait for those returns to happen? What do you think?
I think that you should accept the volatility, not dismiss. I mean, accept it. I mean, be aware of the volatility that will happen many times during the period when you're investing. Not to be mentally forced to sell at the worst possible moment when you should be holding on to it, because you're buying an asset that is deep value, as you said, and that has good potential to grow. So this is what you should be doing. When those assumptions change, then you should change your decision, and that's it. But at the moment, currently, with the level of valuations and the level of the phase of the whole cycle of investing in Iran, which is just about to begin, I think, for many investors, then absolutely it makes sense to invest. I would say a large proportion of your money, but this is individual. So if you should put all in, being me, yes, I can imagine this, right? But this is not the advice that you would give to your average investor, right?
Right. However, it looks like an amazing opportunity right now when we look at the US CAPE. It's 40. They have an earnings yield of 2% or 2.5%. Most markets look expensive. Also, demographics are not great across developed markets. We can talk about Japanification of developed markets. Emerging markets also look better, but Iran looks incredible from all the markets I have researched. And the only issue is that it's not very accessible. So we have this 100K minimum entry. One should decide how much risk he wants to take. But overall, it looks like an amazing opportunity for the next 10 or 20 years.
Agreed.
Maciej, where can people find more about Amtelon Capital and this specific Iranian mutual fund?
So please go to our website, amteloncapital.com, and send us an email if you'd like to get on the mailing list. We're happy to share market updates. I'm on Twitter, try to post some interesting updates from time to time, but please do contact through the website. Yes, hopefully next month there will be a new website with a beautiful chart of the TEDPIX index, of the local equity index in dollar terms. So we're waiting for this update to finally happen.
Great. Maciej, thank you very much for being with us today and joining our podcast. It has been a wonderful conversation about emerging markets, investing opportunities, and specifically the Iranian market. And I hope our viewers have also enjoyed our show today. I wish you, everybody, all the best, and bye-bye for now. Take care.
Thank you so much, Victor. Take care.